My flight landed at midnight. I had just 8 hours to collect my things, organize my bags, and get a brief rest at my hotel in Mendoza. Later that day, I would be setting out to climb Aconcagua, a mountain reaching up to nearly 23,000 feet above sea level, the highest mountain summit in the world outside of the Himalayas. The exact origin of the name isn't clear, but it is believed to derive from the Quechua descriptions of the mountain as White Sentinel or Sentinel of Stone. The mountain sees far more climbers than its smaller neighboring mountains in Argentina due to the fact that Aconcagua is the tallest mountain in South America and therefore one of the 7 summits. Despite its height, the standard route from the north is non-technical, requiring no rock climbing, ice climbing, or even glacier crossing. Yet interestingly, it has the lowest success rate of any of the 7 summits, with some estimations as low as 30 to 40%. Many climbers underestimate the mountain and end up falling short of the summit due to severe weather, altitude sickness, or pure exhaustion. Supplemental oxygen is rarely used, and simple terrain makes it easy to ascend too quickly for one's body to properly adapt to an atmosphere with only 43% of the available oxygen at sea level. Additionally, the mountain is located just 80 miles from the Pacific Ocean, causing frequent storms and severe wind from ocean patterns slamming into the western face of the mountain. The journey to the summit can be divided into 3 sections. First, getting to the base camp known as Plaza de Mulas. Second, caching gear, acclimating, and ascending to high camp. Third, ascending to the summit from high camp. Getting to base camp takes anywhere between 1 and 4 days, depending on one's acclimatization schedule. Most climbers, guided or not, contract with a logistics service that uses mules to carry most food and equipment to base camp. Typically 30 kilograms, or 66 pounds, is permitted for the mules per person. And prior to entering the park climbers drop off their gear for the mules at their logistics hub in the nearby town of Penitentes. From there, it is a short van ride to check in for permitting and get to the entrance. The hike begins with a slightly inclined trail through the open Horcones Valley with great views of the mountain. "4.5 miles in lies the Camp Confluencia, where climbers often stay 1 or 2 nights to acclimate before moving to base camp. When first getting here, you check in with the ranger and show your permit. Confluencia sits at just above 11,000 feet of elevation, and during peak season, one can expect amenities including running water, bathrooms, showers, fresh food, and even beer for purchase. Part of the logistics package offered by most companies will include access to some of these amenities. If you have the basic Inca package like I did, and there aren't many climbers at camp, you may even get your own bunk. The next day, I set out to hike to Plaza Francia and back. This hike ascends into a valley east of the path to base camp and is entirely used to acclimate. No actual camp exists here, but climbers are able to ascend to nearly 14,000 feet of elevation and return to Confluencia the same day. As always, the best way to acclimate is to climb high and sleep low. It can be a windy hike, but conditions were great when I went, and within a few hours I was back at Confluencia for another night. Since I would be leaving Confluencia the next day, I checked in with the medical tent to get signed off on my permit. On the 3rd day, I began my hike to base camp early. Hiking from Confluencia to Plaza de Mulas requires at least 2 stream crossings. Depending on the year and the timing, you may want to start early in the morning, when the streams are at their lowest. At worst, you may need sandals, but I was able to leap over the crossings without much issue. The hike is about 12 miles from Confluencia, mostly on the same open valley terrain. Towards the end, the trail becomes steeper as it ascends to the right of the valley itself until reaching Plaza de Mulas at 14,400 feet. Like Confluencia, the first step is to check in with the rangers. Also like Confluencia, Plaza de Mulas is dominated by infrastructure put into place by the various logistics companies, offering similar but somewhat more limited amenities than Confluencia. After I picked up gear from the mules and got organized in a dining tent, I set up my own tent and began to plan for the coming days. The season so far has been challenging for climbers. Constant high winds and low temperatures have battered the upper mountain. Few have found a suitable window to reach the summit without significant risk of frostbite and hypothermia. It may be a long stay at one of the high camps before summit window manifested, and I would have to plan accordingly. The next day, a blizzard rolled through, collapsing the medical tent for the second time this season. I was ready with a cache of food and gear to place at Camp Canada, the next camp at 16,000 feet. Caching supplies not only provides a way of breaking down the weight to carry up the mountain, but it also allows for climbing high and sleeping low to help acclimate. When the storm died down that afternoon, I hiked up to Camp Canada, dropped my cache, and returned to base camp within about 4 to 5 hours. The following day, I rested at base camp, preparing some gear, enjoying the non-dehydrated food, and meeting other climbers. Since I would be moving to a higher camp the next day, I completed my medical check and got signed off on my permit. Camp Canada is an entirely different world than Plaza de Mulas. No amenities, no water, and high wind exposure. Many climbers choose to skip it entirely in favor of the next camp at 18,000 feet. But sleeping 4,000 feet higher over one night seemed a bit aggressive for ideal acclimatization, and I planned to stay at Canada for 2 days. A good tent is essential for this camp, and my Heidelberg Una held up with good rigging. Once again the next day, I would cache gear, this time at Nido de Condoras, the next camp at 18,000 feet. It's an easy day, and it took about 3 hours, followed the next day by moving camp there. Nido has significantly better wind protection than Canada, and I found a boulder that blocked most of the wind coming from the west. After setting up camp, I visited a pond on the northern side of camp where water can be collected without melting snow. This camp also has rangers and medical personnel stationed. At this point, a weather window was opening up for the following night. Forecast showing winds dropping to 30 miles per hour on the summit, with a negative 20 Fahrenheit wind chill meant a summit attempt might be possible. My acclimatization was going well, and after resting the next day, I would set out at 5:30 in the morning from Nido for the summit. Setting out later would allow for warmer temperatures with the sun rising at 6:30, but it would also mean that I would need to ascend faster to reach the summit by the 3 p.m. turnaround time. Nido is only the second of 3 major camps, with the third being Colera, 1,000 feet above. Making a summit attempt from Nido means a longer day by usually about 2 to 3 hours. After a brief stop at Colera to adjust gear for increasing winds of the upper mountain, I continued to Plaza Independencia, partially destroyed shelter at 21,000 feet. Throughout this time, the route ascends just east of the North Ridge. The wind mostly comes from the Pacific Ocean to the west, so thus far, the route had enjoyed a degree of wind protection. However, just above Plaza Independencia, the route crosses to the west of the ridge along the traverse. This, other than the summit itself, is where wind is most severe. 20 to 30 mile per hour winds were constant through the traverse up until the transition to the Canaleta. Often, there will be mild snow crossings here requiring crampons and an ice axe. After the snowfield, the nice pathway of the traverse transitions into a steep, loose pathway up dust and rock that ascends directly. Many parties choose to keep crampons on just for the increased traction in this terrain. Canaleta translates to gutter, and rockfall can be a hazard here. It is advised to wear a helmet and to be cautious not to cause rocks to fall on parties below. At the top of the Canaleta is La Cueva, a cave feature with good wind protection where many climbers choose to rest before the final summit push. The summit from this point is about 2 hours away. Unfortunately, I reached La Cueva at 2 p.m., meaning getting to the summit by 3 p.m. would be unlikely. This would be as far as I would go on this attempt. Back in Nido, I received word that another summit window was opening up for the next day. I packed up my camp and I moved to Colera, sleeping early that night to prepare for another summit attempt in the morning. Once again, 30 mile per hour winds and negative 20 Fahrenheit temperatures were expected. This time I left at 4 in the morning from Calera. Going earlier in the morning meant colder temperatures, and much of the time this attempt, the temperatures were too cold to record. But my path followed the same route as the previous attempt, only this time reaching La Cueva at 11:30 in the morning. The route to the summit from here is similar to the Canaleta, loose rocks and dirt with a straight trajectory. Final thoughts. I'm just happy to be out here. The way down follows the ascent route almost exactly, with the occasional more direct descent paths being available past Camp Calera. Typically, one can either camp in the same spot after summiting or move camp to a lower altitude. Unexpectedly, on the way down, I came across a woman who needed assistance down, and along with a guide and another climber, we assisted her to Calera, where she was later airlifted off the mountain for medical assistance. This meant getting back to Calera late in the day, and so I camped there one more night and hiked to Plaza de Mulas the following day, and then out of the park the next. Overall, the climb was an incredible experience. It has a unique combination of high altitude with easy terrain that makes the mountain accessible for many willing to take up the challenge. However, high altitude can take serious physical tolls on the body, and the weather on Aconcagua is no joke. Take tested and effective gear for cold temperatures and know when to turn back before jeopardizing fingers and toes. A special thanks to Inca Expeditions for services provided at Confluencia and Plaza de Mulas. And as always, if you liked the video or found it useful, be sure to subscribe.